Happy Friday, everybody. It is time to do grief with some hope and some humor and a little bit of grace, and maybe a lot of grace today with Jill and Deb. Deb, how are you?
Oh, I am so glad you asked. Because there were a couple things I wanted to talk about today, besides unfortunately making the 500
Yeah.
thousand mark of COVID deaths in
Yeah.
10 months. Excuse me while I still clear my throat. Um, yeah, I'm good by grace. That's the
That's a
best
good
way.
thing.
That is. And before we get started, I wanted to see how you were doing. You had your second COVID shot.
And I had a couple of days that were maybe not a lot of good fun, but I am now free of most of it. I'm just going to favor my arm just a tiny bit for a little while longer. But
Mm-hmm.
I am not going to argue because I've got my second COVID shot. And for that, I am so incredibly grateful.
Right.
So
Right.
grateful. And we're at like
I totally
43
get it.
million Americans now who are immunized.
Yes. Yes. And I think almost 10% of the population around here in our
Wow.
county is been vaccinated. Um, excuse me. For our listening audience, I want people to be aware of there's an actual thing called COVID arm. And don't panic if 5 to 7 days later, after you are done, all of a sudden it's like a mosquito from Minnesota came and hit your arm because that's exactly, it looks like a giant mosquito bite, lasts a couple days and then it goes away.
Oh,
So
like a TB test.
yeah, only much bigger. We're talking probably the size of a quarter sticking out of
Oh,
your
kind of
arm.
boil sized. Okay.
Boil size, so just look up COVID arm. And that's real important so you don't panic.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple different reactions I have found over the last week. So that's interesting. Uh, before I go into anything else about me, so I find it, I don't know how many of our listening audience has been through the Vietnam War and watching pictures again and again and again on TV. I sort of feel the same way about 500,000 people. And I don't know about other people. I'm not numb to it, but I haven't processed it. And so that leads me into the next thing. This is real common in grief. For instance, yesterday, it was an accident. Someone rear-ended me.
Oh.
And I was at the stoplight and and they just hit the back of my car, probably moved me maybe a foot or so. They probably weren't going very fast. They just spaced out. I saw there was nothing wrong on the on my car or theirs, and I had to calm the woman down just a little bit. She felt really bad. So I was in park. I got out of the car at the intersection, and then I just went on my way. About 5 minutes later, all of a sudden, I felt like my throat was closing up, and I'm like,
Oh.
seriously? So I had coffee. So I'm the nurse and me. I drink it to see if I'm going to spit it out, and it went down. I'm like, why does my throat in this part feel? Well, when you go back and forth, you hit all your nerves. How do I know this? I got to where I was giving injections, and of course, I called my chiropractor right away. She came in, special for the day. I get through the day. When you have a little trauma, just a little one, sometimes it takes you a couple days to process it until you feel safe again. And that's what I want to say to our listeners. I'm not that different. I bet the magnitude of what has happened in this country and all these deaths, and you know someone that's had a death, or you know someone that knows someone, or
Right.
Facebook is filled with, can I have prayers? So-and-so has COVID.
Mm-hmm.
The magnitude might not hit you till next year. And that's because it might not hit you exactly, but you'll also find you're sort of sensitive in other areas. And
a little hyperreactive.
Hyperreactive to things because of all the deaths in COVID that you haven't really felt. And go ahead and add to that, please, Jill.
If you're not really looking at each death that affects you right when it happens and staying with it in that moment, and instead putting it back because there's more coming and there's too much media and there's too much stuff, it can then come back as kind of a wave that's just exhausting. It feels to me like the quilt showing up all over the Washington Mall. First time it was there, it covered half the mall. Second time, there was too much of it, and it covered the mall and down several other places, and parts of it couldn't be displayed. Mm-hmm. And now it takes 3 warehouses. So it kind of feels like that. And mm-hmm. And yeah, we've got a lot of different populations who are going to be feeling the magnitude of what they have walked through mm-hmm. as they're able to emerge from being in the middle of it. So all of our hospital staff, not just the nurses and the doctors, all the mm-hmm. hospital staff, all the first responders, all of us who've had multiple losses, all the funeral directors and morgue folks, anybody who's been in the middle of it, those folks are going to get hit with it later, and we need to be ready for them, and they need to be ready to ask for help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, even with a good friend the other day, some trauma that happened to her 40 years ago or 30 years ago, probably. Mm-hmm. She was talking. She mentioned it maybe a few weeks ago, and then she mentioned it again. And I just whipped out my phone, gave her the number of my therapist. And even people who believe in therapy and believe that you should talk to someone, one, they don't always do it themselves.
Right. No, therapists are notorious.
Oh, it's like nurses. We are horrible.
Yeah, you are worse than us. I will give you that.
Now, just a minute here.
And funeral directors are ahead of all of us.
Oh, don't worry. It's not going to kill me. I know what they're going to do. And then, so it's with grief, maybe you're not going to feel the grief, but becoming more self-aware of what's passing through you and your reactions to grief. I know I've said this before, but a mirror broke in our house. This was back in 1997. Oops. And it was my dad's, or it wasn't my dad's. It had come from his boss. Mm-hmm. And it was like one of the last vestiges of my dad, but I never thought about it. And it accidentally broke. I lost it.
You were devastated.
Time. And I had already been in therapy and all this stuff. But when I was like over the top, over a mirror, and I don't usually care about things breaking.
The representation got to you.
I finally mourned the death of my dad 27 years later. I was 14 when he died. And so I was busy taking care of everybody else because nobody else could step up
And at
emotionally.
14, you didn't have the language or the wherewithal to understand what the impact would be.
Right. So
Right?
as odd as this might be, for many people, not until the COVID news is more in the background
Mm-hmm.
and you feel safer. It's like a lot of people, myself included, when the new president came and took the oath of office, I started to cry. It was like a relief and a grief because for me, I was too busy coping with
Mm-hmm.
someone's belief system that I hated, which will be the next part that I was going to talk about. Because you can love somebody and hate their belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And that pretty much fits all religions. You can hate their belief system and allow yourself that grief. So we say these things because 500,000,
That's all of World War One, all of World
all of
War
World War
II,
II, and
and
all of
all of
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a lot, and that's in less than a year.
right. That's
Yeah.
right.
We've had a tremendous number of losses, and it's time to start talking about them more and talking about how it's hitting us, and to still find the good things about those who've died, and to remember the stuff that can make us smile about them, and for some to remember the grace with which they handled an illness that was frightening. If you were lucky enough to have somebody like that, and to take a lesson from that as well, right? Because there's a lot we can learn from these losses, even if we didn't want the losses, and absolutely none of us did. But we
No.
can still learn to. I was on a show with Max Tucci, who does Max and Friends, and we were talking about grief and loss yesterday, and he talked about how for him the COVID loss of a beloved adopted grandmother was not a terrible thing. It was a moment of grace for him because she had never wanted to be placed in a facility, and she'd had to live in one for about 3 years because of illness and debilitation and dementia. And he said for him, he felt like her very rapid death from COVID was a moment of grace because she was released from being where she was. And for him, that was a moment for him to say sometimes it's okay. Not that everybody else's losses are okay, because he certainly lost other people. That's not to say that others are, but for some, it was an okay thing.
And the next part of loss is I wanted to be there. You hear this over and over. They died alone. They died with strangers taking care of them. That's not the way a death is supposed to be. And it happens. What do you say to the people that have this? It was out of their control anyway, but they feel, I want to use the term guilty or remorse.
They feel sad. They feel angry. Because up until last year, even if someone died in the hospital, you could be there with them.
Right.
Right. But I work with the nurses and the staff who say we're tired of being called strangers because we're doing intimate care, and it's not like we don't care. We're not technicians. We are busy. We're swamped, but every single dying person gets attention and gets loving care. And even if we're not supposed to hold hands, we put our gloves on and we do it anyway, because this is a life that's leaving this world. And so for those folks, what I say is, if you can at some point after this is over, connect with the hospital staff or send them a note
and say thank you.
Say thank
Just
you.
acknowledge.
And I appreciate that you were there. My mom was this person. Here's her picture. You may not recognize her because, she may have been prone, but thank you for taking good care of her. Right? Because nobody in the hospital is there because on staff is there because they don't care.
Exactly.
There's lots of other nursing and doctor jobs that are not COVID units right now.
Oh,
right? They could be
Absolutely.
safely doing immunizations.
And after a while, for those nurses, as we've stated before, or doctors or whoever's in there, maybe it's
Yeah.
respiratory therapists.
Mm-hmm.
Think how many are doing those double duties,
Right.
death after death after death after death. I hope if there's any people that have been part of this, that they're in therapy, or call your EAP through
Or they
your
have time
hospital.
for it, right? Because
Right.
there are therapist groups available to do free counseling for the
Mm-hmm.
frontliners, and they can't get people to call in because they're so tired. 12-hour, 14-hour shifts,
Right.
home, back again in 6.5 hours. By the time you've eaten, showered, washed your clothes, decontaminated,
They just
there's
want to
no
be
time for
asleep.
that. Right, but there will be time later. I will give the funeral directors credit. There's now a post-traumatic stress disorder community support group run by funeral directors that's private and online. So if you're in that camp, find them.
Mm-hmm.
They are there, and they're acknowledging. Most of them are old school because they're finally saying, "Whoa, we've seen bad before. This is beyond bad."
Mm-hmm.
But there's
Mm-hmm.
support out there, and I would encourage everyone to find it. But also to acknowledge the losses, right?
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of chatter in the therapist community about how do we acknowledge a client's death? You do it like
Oh,
you
yeah.
acknowledge other deaths,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And
Because your clients count, and it's a relationship.
even here in Champaign County, I know therapists. A few are taking more, but
Mhm.
they're booked. And as you and
Solid.
my other, pardon, book
They're booked
solid.
solid.
That's right. And then you have to take time for yourself as a therapist, as a
Mhm.
coach, as whatever to, oh my goodness.
And that's
So,
more important. It's important for all of us to remember that even in the midst of it, we need to find some
mhm,
grace about some pieces of this.
right.
For me, the grace is we've got people who are willing to step up in hospitals. We've got people willing to step in and vaccinate, like you're doing, like my
Oh, so
friend
many.
Lori Oshiro is doing out here. We've got people willing to do those things. We've got people who are able to remember the funny things about the person who died. Right? Max
Mhm,
and I talked about the fun stuff about his grandma yesterday because she was a
mhm.
hoot. She had to be related to that man. So you two would get along like gangbusters. Right? So it's that kind of thing. Let's remember what's funny about them because it gives us that lift and that joy. It gives our brains a little shot of some good stuff in the chemistry department.
Mhm.
Let's do those things. Let's laugh at the funny things our critters are doing.
I I remind people that it's not like a cure. Therapy isn't a cure right away, and after 10 days, the symptoms will go away. But you're going to get bigger moments.
Mhm.
And I in any kind of grief, you go through bigger moments. That's all you can do are moments.
Sometimes therapy is just a safe place to
Mhm.
unload,
Uh-huh.
right? You just need some place where your family can't hear you. Sometimes your partner or spouse can't hear you.
Right.
And I do love my spouse, don't hear me wrong. You just want to just say all the things, right? Or I can't believe this happened or that happened or I'm stressed about. Sometimes it's just unloading and knowing that that screen is contained and no
Okay.
one's going to hear you but that person there, or
Right.
that door is closed if you happen to have one who's in person right now and no one can hear you,
Right.
right? That's
Yeah.
probably 80% of what my therapist does, just kind of absorbs Jill, right?
Right.
Little
Right.
reframe, a whole lot of absorbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some laughing
Sometimes,
because
and
you have to
sometimes
laugh
I
if you're
just
my therapist.
you like mine doesn't. I had one therapist go, "Can you not make a joke right now? Stop making a joke because that's like major deflection for me." So I found this article online. I just wanted to go over some of these because even though well, it's 4 points that this person learned from therapy that I
Mm,
think is important just to state simply for grief. And the
yeah.
first one is trauma, but you can say grief or a death can come from anywhere, and it doesn't have to be like uh, a giant thing that happened
Mm-mm.
to
It could be the
affect you.
lizard dying when you're a kid.
You'll go back to that and you'll go, let's call the lizard James. I don't know. And James the lizard died. I had Sammy the turtle. And you
You
might go
killed your
back and
turtle?
I did. I didn't put water, and eventually after 10 days he stuck to something. You
Poor
know,
baby. Yep.
I know. And I think, oh my God, what an awful person. But you don't realize how those little things build up. The same
Mhm.
way we tell people little things are do the little things because that has an effect too.
Mhm.
Um, Here's another thing. Feelings are always valid, even if others don't understand them
Or don't accept them and don't want to
or
hear them.
don't accept them. Your feelings are still valid. And so many, myself included, were always told, seriously, you're upset about that?
That's where the grief rules get in the way because
Mm-hmm,
you're told how to feel and how to
mm-hmm,
express your feelings
mm-hmm,
and how soon you should and how
mm-hmm,
soon you should be over and what
mm-hmm.
they should be about. And that's where in therapy you should be learning how to set boundaries so you can have your feelings and own them as your own. Not
Yes,
to batter other people over the head with them, but so that you can acknowledge them as your own.
that you can acknowledge them and you don't need others to acknowledge your feelings.
Right.
You can
They're mine. I
stand
got
in, yeah, I'm feeling this way. I don't, and is it worth even expressing your feelings to certain people because they're going to blow you off? If you're at that point, you better reevaluate the relationship.
check the expectations. If you're expressing feeling because you're going to change somebody, you're on the wrong line.
Yep.
If you're expressing feelings because you think this is somebody who's going to be supportive and they're just going to allow you to have them, great. But if you're trying to use them to batter someone and to change someone, that's not going to happen. That's not how people work. That's probably not how
It's
you work.
right. But that might be the way you were taught.
Yep.
So, yeah, here's another one. There's always room to be kinder to yourself.
Lots of room. Lots and lots of room. And to
Um,
accept that you're okay.
yeah,
We've got room to
yeah.
grow, but you're okay. That whole
In
thing about you're enough is really real. It's not woo woo. It's real.
on Fridays, according to what are they called? The days of the week. Oh my gosh, good-hearted living. So each day of the week, I learned this through World Laughter Tour. Each day of the week represents something else. Mondays are for compliments. Tuesdays are for flexibility. Wednesdays are for gratitude. Thursdays are for kindness. But Fridays are for forgiveness. And Saturday and Sunday are for chocolate. We'll talk about that later. But Fridays for forgiveness, that's a hard concept. So I look at it as how can you be kinder to yourself? And we've done this a million times, but everybody in the listening audience or whenever you listen to this, you can go ahead and just rub a tender spot on your sternum and you go, I'm okay. You don't have to say, I forgive you, because it's sort of like if a little kid falls down in front of you and maybe rips a hole in their jeans or tears something, and they go, oh, I'm so sorry, I ruined my foot, whatever. And you go, it's okay. You just
Mhm.
pick them up and say, it's okay. You're your own little kid, and it looks like you tore something, and you just rub that little tender spot and you go, it's okay. It's okay. And that's what being kind to yourself is.
It's a
Uh,
self-soothing.
self self-soothing, and you're not going to start being kind to other people. It looks like you are, but you'll be even more kind if you start being kind to yourself. because that empathy factor really works in there, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and
Yeah,
you want to be able to really provide what other people need, but you can't if you're stuck inside your head. Then it's not
right,
sincere,
right. That's right.
right?
That's right.
You still
So,
and you still in all of that need to find that's where you're giving yourself grace, but you also want to be able to smile while you're doing it,
mhm, exactly.
right?
Or as I like to say, plan B. Anything you can do with humor and grace and a smile on your face.
That's
It's
exactly
okay.
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, you make it up as you go. And lastly, and we mentioned this earlier in the broadcast, you can still love someone and hate or despise their beliefs.
Mhm.
You just say, no, I love you. And,
I don't have the time of day for what you are believing in, but that's
right.
okay because I still love you. Yep. Mhm.
Um, I I had a dear friend that for maybe a decade, we've been friends for 27 years now, and she was all like very fear based. Everything like, oh, I don't know, that might happen, that might happen. And finally, at some point, I said, I love you, and I do not support your fears anymore. You'll have to find somebody else that'll do it. I'm just not going down that road with you. Don't do that road with me because
Sounds like
I
she had
don't
some trauma
believe.
there. Yeah.
Say again.
It sounds like she had some trauma she needed to resolve.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, a decade after that, she goes, I appreciate that. And yes, she has a therapist now that is good and integritous, and because there's some therapists that are not very integritous, and so it's you don't have to support someone's beliefs. You don't even have to support your kids' beliefs. You know, you can say,
You just have to
I,
survive them. Speaking as a girl mom, you just got to survive them. Right? I hear a
and
lot about boy mom, but girl moms, yeah, we got our hands full. If you're a girl mom, hands out to you. Right? Eventually they grow up
yeah,
and they do their thing, but some of that time in between is a little bit of a challenge. Right?
and you take comfort, joy, and pleasure in watching them grow those baby steps, whatever those baby steps are for them. You know, it could happen when they're 20, it could happen when they're 30, it could happen when they're 40.
You just
That's
never
part
know.
of
Right. There's room for growth at every age. Right? I was talking to someone yesterday and they said, I thought when I was 18 I knew it all. And I said, and now? Yeah, now I'm kind of finding that there's room for growth and learning no matter how old I get. And this was someone who I think was like late 20s, early 30s. Wait till you get a little bit older. Yes, there's always room for that. There
you
is.
know, there is. And if you're sort of, you can start therapy at any age. I remember I was early 40s and I said to my therapist, I said, when am I going to learn this one simple lesson? And she said, you're 40 something, you're getting it. You're not 70 something and learning it. It's about, what is it about every decade? Stuff that you've shoved down, it,
It finds its way back up.
right.
That's why personally I think getting older is a lot more fun because you do get to look back at all the stuff and go, oh, and maybe even pick up the phone and say, I'm so sorry. Right? Oh, mom, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I
I'm
was a
not
little
going to
pissed
say
off.
sorry to my sisters yet, but I'm sure that'll happen at some point. And I'm sure they're waiting.
So my stepdaughter, when she was 15, I won't go into the specifics, but it was fifth. I mean, she was driving a car, so she had to be 16 or 17. And she came back from her mom's house, and she said, if I ever have a daughter, I will not. And so I said, I get that. I remember feeling that way. Can you write that down? She has a daughter now who's 10.
Yep.
And I have this piece of paper signed by her that she will be getting in a frame the next couple Christmases. And
I
she
love
knows
that.
it. She knows that I saved it for all these years because she'll be 38 this year. So, yeah.
It's fun
Isn't
to
that
watch
great?
everybody learn the lessons. I'm sure my mom would have done exactly the same thing to me.
I was
Although
like,
I was the good kid. Right?
oh.
I did my homework. I didn't do the stuff. But still, I'm sure there are moments she has stored in the back of her memory. And unfortunately, with her dementia, it's going to come flying forward faster than later with a lot less filter. I just know what's going to happen. Right?
At the same time, I mean, my mom thought I was nuts and off the rails most of my life. I just 100%. But I'll never forget this compliment where we were talking about religion. And I mentioned something about the founder of Hasidic Judaism to relatives. And she goes, and they like stop. They go, who is that? I go, the founder of Hasidic Judaism. And they went, how do you know this stuff? And my mother, God bless her, who thought I was off the rails all the time, she goes, my Debbie knows. She reads about this. And I'm like, can you write that down so I can have it framed?
I want credit.
I want credit. I want a certificate.
Right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Jill, so you had sent me something earlier about, it's on Facebook a lot, about the 500,000 vigil for
vigil coming up on March 1st
Mhm.
for the 500,000. And it's not specifically for that. It was spurred on because we got to 500,000 losses, and we're way beyond that by today.
Oh yeah.
Again, my heart goes out to anybody who's been part of those losses. Certainly both of us have. But there is now a move to do a national day of remembrance or mourning. They're kind of working out the wording right now. And it's being put together in part by a grassroots movement that was started by a young woman who lost family members and was last year just feeling like no one's paying attention. And so somebody's got to do something. She's an original. I need this to be acknowledged. I need to be able to talk about my dad. I need to have people know this happened. We need to get together. We need to stop the people from saying this isn't real. So that plus a couple of other groups have come together. And on March 1st, there will be a national vigil. I don't know if the federal government has wound into it yet. My hunch is it will be. This just got started putting together late last week, I believe, from what I can tell. So as soon as we have more information, we will post it.
Right.
And
next week is March 1st.
Next week. So if this week, as things come up, we'll get it posted on here. And we'll give you the link so that you can participate because they will be doing it. But we'll put the link on this page and all of our other spots where this is. And Deb will put it up on hers so that you can get in there. There's a free e-ticket that you can sign up for. So if you see something that says get a ticket, they're not going to charge you for it.
Right.
It's just to give you access to it. I guess they're trying to keep people from hijacking it, which, in our current age, sometimes we got to do that. Right. But it would be a great place if you have had one of those losses, if you want to join with other people, and if you want to see other people honoring your loss, this would be some place to do that.
Right.
And
go ahead.
I think they're also looking at perhaps asking states to do flags at half-mast. I'm not sure if that's going to happen yet or not. Again, it's been really rapid. But with COVID, everything is really rapid and we're all learning how to pivot. So if you have time and if you don't have time at that specific day and time, then it will, of course, be recorded so you can join in later and see how many people were there and hear the words that people have to offer.
I'm really, thank you, Jill, for saying that. And like I said, both of us will put it on our Facebook pages. CBS this morning, I think once a week they take 5 names, reach out they're not all from New York or Atlanta. They reach out across all over the United States, and they go into depth with pictures and stuff. And I even have goosebumps just thinking about. And if you've lost someone from COVID, and I'm sure it'd be okay, go ahead and list their names on our page. List a picture if you want. And I'm gonna and Jill, I'll tag you. I'll write something up, and then for prayers, if you feel comfortable, if the family feels comfortable, they might not. Go ahead and put that up. A friend of mine is waiting for a transplant, and there's been lots of problems, and COVID only adds to the problem.
It's made it significantly worse.
It has. They've been on the wait list, and every day they get a couple days, and then it goes away, and every day this, and that goes away. So if I like what someone said more recently, every death is a COVID death over the last 12 months. Right. They all are. Somehow they are affected by COVID. So
right. So put your people's pictures up, tell us something about them.
Right.
What made them smile? What made them laugh? What makes you smile when you think about them? Right. Put up a silly picture if you want. Usually in obituaries, we put in the very serious ones, or someone in a tux at a wedding or something that wasn't really them. Put up the picture that was them.
Put up, right. That's right.
The ones that I have on my Christmas tree are who my people were when they were being them, not when they were posing. Right?
And you see this, if it froze like this, that would be me.
Right.
People know there's Deb. Yeah.
I finally found most of my pictures of my grandparents on my dad's side. They were, taken when people were a little more serious, taking pictures. Not quite so much that, but there were some of those, they're the early childhood pictures. But even then they were more relaxed and a little more serious. And I just found a picture of my grandma and grandpa in their bathing suits in the lake in Florida. They lived on Lake Annie in Polk County. And they were in the lake in their retirement years just before he died, floating there, just smiling at each other. And I'm guessing my aunt took the picture. I don't know, but it's now my favorite picture of them because it was them being them. Right?
Right.
So post those pictures, who they really were.
All right, everybody.
Okay, we'll see you back next week on March 1st, which is before then. Please make sure that if you feel like you need to, you can check into the National Day of Remembrance, and we will see you back here next week.
That sounds great.
Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.